co-host. Good evening and welcome to the Thriving in the Dissertation webinar series. Tonight we're listening to Dr. Mary Tabata talk to us about taming the inner critic, because none of us know what that is like. So we're so excited to have you, Doctor. I don't have your bio up, so that's where I screwed. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background, because I know you're doing a lot in California and with coaching, and it just sounds real
Sure.
cool.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you so much, Faith, for setting us up, and thanks for the invitation. My name is Mary Tabata, and I sit in Los Angeles, and I still work in multiple time zones. So I know it's evening back east. This is actually my second lecture for today, and it's completely different topic. So I presented to another group earlier about some projects that I'm doing. And as Faith said, I do work as a coach. I coach women. I coach people who are in various kinds of transitions, life transitions. So do career coaching, career offboarding, career changes. That's really popular. Those things, and also talking to people about their self-identity and their inner critic. That's a real passion for me. My coaching partner, who is in Brisbane, Australia, so I still work in the Australian time zone. I did used to teach in Australia, and that was pretty tough. Not physically, I was all remote. But we are doing a series for women in leadership and unique challenges that women experience. So I am really excited to be here with you this afternoon and talk to you about the inner critic. You can see my slide. And Faith, I will ask you to help me if there's something that comes in the chat. Usually if I'm a screen share, I can't see it. So,
Okay.
so if anything does pop up, please let me know.
Yeah.
So what I am going to cover this evening is to talk about a little bit about the origins of the inner critic and its importance and usefulness, because it actually does provide some useful information to us. And then I would like to tell you a fairy tale that really kind of illustrates the inner critic, and share with you some coping tools or practices that you may want to explore more and develop so that you can manage your inner critic. And then some other tips and takeaways that I hope that you will explore. And Faith will put up the slides also once we're done. So we push the right button here. So I'm just going to say a little bit about the origins of the inner critic. Actually, any one of those topics on the agenda could be a whole talk in itself. So it is really pretty fascinating. It's kind of modern construction, although I have seen that the people make relation to both Freud and Jung and some of their psychological theories. Freud's superego, and it is also Jungian, kind of the shadow self, and some attitude ideas that appear. So the best thinking about the origins of one's own inner critic is that it has early origins, usually something that was absorbed in childhood. Um, People who have undergone trauma in childhood often have a very, very strong inner critic, although you don't have to have experienced significant trauma in order to have an inner critic. So don't think that you have some kind of repressed memory or something if you still have your inner critic that's talking to you. But these are patterns that develop fairly early on and that we carry with us. and people adopt and integrate these critical thoughts. And for some people, it becomes the only self-talk that they really hear. They forget to listen to the other voice, which we're going to see in a few minutes. But the inner critic is something that almost everybody has in some way, shape, or form. Just that some people's negative talk is a lot stronger than others, or at different times, your negative talk really starts to take over what you're hearing when you reflect. You're hearing a very negative and critical voice. So, what the inner critic does is evaluate your actions, and often using that negative voice, the inner critic demands productivity. So, you're always pushing, you're always seeking to be productive. But the voice of the inner critic can lead to a sense of inadequacy and worthlessness. And this is where the therapists get involved, coaches get involved. When your inner critic leads you to believe that you are inadequate, when you're having feelings of worthlessness, when you're questioning all of the things that you're doing, and it can become very, very paralyzing. And so that is where we really encourage people to go and talk it out, get some assistance in actually talking to your inner critic and figuring out what it is exactly that the critic is trying to accomplish for you. So I love this quote from Neil Gaiman. He's an author who wrote, "The greatest illusions are not those we create for others, but those we create for ourselves," from a collection that he wrote called Smoke and Mirrors. And really, what the inner critic is doing is creating an illusion, and usually a false illusion, for ourselves. So, on the one hand, you're projecting great confidence and great ability, but you're not really feeling that. The inner critic is related to imposter syndrome, which I'm sure all of us are familiar with that concept and what that means, and what happens, that you don't really believe what it is that you're projecting. And the inner critic is related to that, talking in the back of your mind about your inadequacy and that you need to be more productive in order to achieve whatever it is the inner critic is telling you that you want to achieve. But I do want to say something about the importance of your inner critic, because even though we may have looked at the preceding material and think that all that it is this little voice that's telling us we aren't doing well enough or being really critical of our efforts, there are actually uses for the inner critic. And so, what can we use this voice for? Well, the critic, while it can provide criticism and disapproval, it does keep you productive because it has that productivity bet, and it is pushing you towards producing more, towards being more productive, towards striving for more things. It can increase your standards because you are seeking to satisfy that negative voice that's telling you you need to try harder, you need to do a little better. And there are studies of people who have low self-criticism. So they still have an inner critic that is giving them this feedback, but it is not as negative as those who trend towards a high self-criticism and a highly negative inner critic. But we can use the critic in these ways to help us move towards our goals. And I just want to say that what's interesting about the inner critic is that it is based in neuroscience. So the coaching program that I went through, we actually studied the neuroscience of why individuals behave the way that they do, why sometimes we make choices the way that we do. And what it really came down to is that our primitive brain, the fight or flight brain, the amygdala of the brain, which is a very basic brain, uh, but holds a lot of emotion. Um, Procrastination and paralysis are actually symptoms of an amygdala hijack. That's what we call it. And so when the critic is talking to you and you get paralyzed because you're not sure what it is you're supposed to do, you're not sure if you're doing enough, and so you don't do anything. These are actually really related to your own neuroscience, to the way that we are wired. The fight or flight part of the brain does not like us to take on big projects like a dissertation, where what you are looking at is you're looking at the dissertation as a whole. You're looking at it as, here's all 5 chapters done, and what do I do to get there, because I should have already done it, and etc. I don't have to explain that in this room. So what you really need to learn to do is to outsmart your amygdala response. And we're going to get to that in a little bit. And that also helps tame part of the inner critic that's telling you you're not working hard enough or smart enough or fast enough. Um, and the amygdala's job is to help us survive. We have to keep alive. We have to stay alive. We have to do the things that we need to do in order to stay alive. And if we're working on this big project and we're not working hard enough and we're not making any progress, or so it seems to the inner critic, that's the messaging that we're getting, then how can we stay alive, right? So it's a really kind of interesting concept, because you need to rewire how you're thinking about some of your big projects, and how you can kind of help the amygdala align so that you can get through your big projects and get to the next thing. So in this case, that means that your inner critic can actually be tamed and actually become your inner coach. And there are articles that are written about this, about flipping that. So before I launch into the next section, I would like you to meet Maud. Maud is my inner critic. She is the inner critic. And let me say something about this image. So I don't know how many of you have played with AI image generation. I have just recently sent in two proposals for the International Leadership Association Global Conference on the uses of generative AI in writing. One of my colleagues actually used generative AI in images and shared that with us. And so I had all kinds of various trolls, gnomes, and elves that I asked the AI engine to create. And this one to me looked the most like Maud in my head. Usually she sits on my shoulder right here when she's talking to me. Often what I would do with Maud is to send her to my backyard patio. I have a lovely basket chair, and I would encourage her to just spend some time outside away from me so that I could write and I could do the things that I needed to do, and that she could come back and check on me later. So I actually named her because I actually do talk to her. And so I would like to share with you a dissertation fairy tale, which illustrates, I think, part of my own inner critic and what happens in my process. And so, like many people in this room, I started my doctoral work, my doctoral program, and I was very excited. I was going along, things were wonderful. And as you know, you get just volumes of information, right? You get more reading, concepts, theories, ideas to digest, and it's overwhelming. It is literally that phrase of trying to drink water out of a fire hose. You're trying to stay upright. You're trying to drink as much water as you can without getting knocked over. And so this is where, Maud would tell me, well, you're not doing enough to stay afloat. You have to stay up later so that you can do your reading and your posting and your writing and your organization. And you need to do that. Otherwise, you're not doing a good enough job. In fact, uh, what I was told by one of my mentors is that we're actually not designed to read absolutely everything that gets assigned to us in our doctoral work. He told me this like after I had already been through my comprehensive exams. But his point of view was that we are given this much work so that we are exposed to lots of thinking and lots of theories in many different ways in a period of time that if we were to go and digest this ourselves, we would never get to have this kind of cross section and the rapid fire, the learning that happens. And it is done in order really to change you and to rewire your brain so that you are thinking like a doctoral scholar and you're not just a graduate student anymore. You're approaching your research, you're going to design your study. And when he said that to me, that actually was really helpful because I could tell Maud and tell her it's okay. I'm getting enough of it. I'm making notes. I know what I need to do. And so I embarked on my journey of my dissertation. And as I just shared with Faith, and as Dr. Karen knows, I had challenges. I designed my study no fewer than 3 times, including doing an amendment to my IRB because my target population was not going to produce uh, a viable sample. So I needed to change that. So there were various challenges as I set out to get my data and get to the analysis and writing part of my dissertation. So if we're thinking of this as a fairy tale and I'm the hero, then this was part of my quest. This was part of the hero's journey that I went on. And I did get data. It was very exciting. It was a lot of data, but not terribly overwhelming. And then I started writing, and uh, and I was working full time, teaching. I think 10 sections of classes in an MBA program over 8 time zones, and doing my data analysis. And so often that's how I felt. And if you can imagine Maud, she was sitting on my shoulder, reminding me that I needed to get done and that I should have already been done. And this is the other thing, the inner critic is really good about the things you should have done already, or you should have thought about before you set out to collect all this data from 870 agencies across the US. And what were you thinking? And all of these things that, your inner critic um, likes to talk to you about. They bring up a lot of your shortcomings and they don't tell you enough about what you are doing well. So, but like other fairy tales, this one has a happy ending. And the ending is that I did defend my dissertation, and today is the anniversary date of my dissertation defense. I defended on April 3rd, 2023. And I did get to walk in graduation last year. So that's that middle picture with my husband and our daughter. And now, also during this time, which Dr. Karen can tell you, um, one of the things that my inner critic also encourages me to do is to say yes a lot when I should actually say no, or I should actually think about what I'm saying yes to. So last year during 2022-23, I was a Rotary president of a fairly large club here in Los Angeles. Being a Rotary president is like having another job. And I already was teaching all these sections across all of these time zones, and have a kid still at home, and was writing my dissertation, and was a Rotary president. So when we had my demotion party, which is basically the installation of the cabinet for the next year, those are all the doctors in my club. I am very blessed that I have people who have earned doctorates who are in my club. And all of the outgoing presidents are all roasted, by your friends in your club as you get to leave office. And so for my roast, which was held at a motorcycle museum, that's why there's all the lights and everything hanging over us. My friends dressed in their regalia, and they read my dissertation to the other attendees who had no idea what was going on. And they had no idea what was going on because nobody has a degree in leadership. They're all from other disciplines. But I think that I am probably one of the few people who has graduated from Eastern who's had their dissertation, large parts of their dissertation, read out loud in a public setting that had nothing to do with research, and everything to do with that these people cared about me and they supported me, and it was really pretty hilarious and wonderful, and I think awful for the people who attended because they had no idea what was going on. So here is another piece about the amygdala hack. So if you assume with your dissertation, for example, that you need to go from point A to point B, and say that these two pictures are the same distance, right? So which one is safer? You could put that in the chat. I probably could see it. I'm assuming that most of us are going to say that the stairs are probably safer, a safer way to traverse the distance to go from point A to point B. But with our little friend, the amygdala, as it rolls in, it sees that covering the distance the same. So it doesn't see the difference between jumping across the chasm or taking the stairs, because the way that the brain is seeing it, it is taking time away from the brain's purpose, which is to help us survive and keep us alive. We're taking time to move from point A to point B. And so even though we know that the stairs are a much better way to get there, the brain and our inner critic are kind of seeing that in the same way. So another way to think about that is if you were a judge, if you were being judged, or if you're really looking for justice, what we are feeling in those moments is judgment due to the judge that sits in our head and our inner critic. And rather, what we are seeking is justice. We're seeking a way to give ourselves our own due process, and the acknowledgement of the work that we're doing, and not just have someone judging us for the work that it says, for me, Maud, is saying that I haven't done yet and that I should have already done. So with all of that in mind, how do we best cope with what our inner critic is giving us? So I did put that hammock there for a reason. It is really important um, to have different techniques and practices that you can adopt and use, especially when your critic is becoming very strident. One way that several ways that you can quell this amygdala hijack. There is a technique called micro stepping. So if you think about that other slide and you think about the stair steps and you think about whatever it is that you're working on, if it's a project, if it's your dissertation, if it's another piece of writing, if it's something that you're needing to get done that has multiple layers, you think of each one of those steps as a series of smaller steps. It's a technique called micro stepping. What happens with micro stepping is you take point one and you divide it into really, really small tasks that you can call them, I call them 5-minute blasts that really take 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So I've worked with people who are working on their literature review, for example, and suggested to them that they work on one topic and break it down and say, I'm spending 5 minutes looking at these two articles and writing down keywords. If you do that, it does trick the amygdala because the amygdala will not get in your way. The amygdala says that's 5 minutes. That's pretty good. That's not spanning that whole piece of point A to point B. You can do that, and I can still keep us alive. I am fulfilling my job to help us survive. So Maud, in that case, could go out and sit in a chair for 5 minutes, and it was okay. And what happens is that then that starts to rewire your brain also because you're having success, and the success feels really good to the brain. So then when you take on your next micro step, your next two micro steps, or you do a couple of 5-minute blasts, it's easier to put the inner critic aside and to work around what the amygdala is saying because you're training your brain to work in a different way. And it's also really important then to have rewards, which there I think there's the meme which says, you work for the graduate student said, I'm going to take a short break, and 2 years later you come back to it. So not that kind of a reward, but something that's small, that's significant. So maybe you have a cup of tea, maybe you send a text message to a friend and say, hey, I did this. So little small rewards that you are giving yourself, and that also helps increase the success factor for your brain. And then other ways that you can turn your inner critic into that coach is that you focus on your progress. So I know Dr. Hernandez has some worksheets on your word count when you're concerned about your word count, when you're concerned about what does the first draft look like, and you just write until you have it, but you have that now. It is also important to develop a support group, and this can be a support group within your academic community or a support group outside your academic community. You can have multiple ones. And the third bullet point is what we were talking about when Dr. Karen came into the room, that you find a writing group, a writing coach, an accountability partner, someone who is with you on the journey. And that, for me, made a huge difference. It's made a big difference for a lot of us in the dissertation writing circle. It's part of why we created the dissertation writing circle, so that people could find others who were also on the journey and have companions, because we understand, we get it. It is also really important when dealing with the inner critic to practice self-compassion. And so these are just some practices that are helpful for people to use affirmations. Maybe you find an affirmation of the week and you write it. If you journal, you write it down and you look at it. To practice meditation and mindfulness. For those of us who practice in faith, to have prayer. It is also important to exercise and get out in nature. That also helps rewire your brain rather than sitting looking at the screen. The data is not going to change even if you sit and stare at it for hours. Unless you do something with it, it's really not going to just jump out at you. So it's important to take those breaks. It's important to eat well and eat regularly. Guilty. I'm really guilty of that. I would find sometimes that also because of my uneven work hours that I wouldn't know what time I was eating, and then I would just go and eat the first thing that I found, which was, usually like a marshmallow bar or something like that, which is just not very conducive to helping my body and my brain with the work that I needed to do. And to drink water. Please don't get dehydrated on your journey. This is really, really important. And all of these things, all of these practices are ways that you can increase your self-compassion, that you can be supportive of yourself and gentle with yourself. And especially as you are working on important things and you're in an academic process, it's really important to practice self-compassion and to not let yourself get beaten up. And don't let your inner critic help you beat yourself up also. So here are just a few tips and takeaways. First of all, your inner critic, like the amygdala, is just trying to protect you. Your inner critic is trying to protect you and talking to you about potential disappointment. And you can actually tame your critic and turn it into your coach. Help your critic learn to say positive things. You can actually thank your inner critic for bringing up this point of view. And then, like I did with Maud, tell it to get lost for a little while so that you can do some work. So this link will be live when we send out the slide deck. It's a very good article that has practices, it has worksheets about how to talk to your inner critic and how to deal with that voice. It has worked. I created an affirmation book. I actually collected affirming quotes and wrote them in a separate journal, kept it on hand, used the different colors. I practiced visualization. So, excuse me, the water. The visualization of actually being done and what that would be like. Include creativity in your daily routine. If you're wondering about how to do that and why, working creatively actually is another way to rewire your brain. So coloring books are great. Painting is great, and you don't have to be a great painter. So don't let your inner critic hijack that for you also. Cooking. I'm a baker. We ate a lot of baked goods while I was writing. And all of these things help you process the other work that you're doing and give you the opportunity to rewire and to reset. That's also like taking the walk in nature, things like that. So the slide that I had with the judge robe and Lady Justice. There is he's a coach and he studied psychology who talks about how all of us have the judge. The judge just sits with us and judges all kinds of things all the time. But the judge has helpers. So this is a really interesting assessment. It's really different from any other kind of assessment that you'll see because you find out who your accomplice saboteur is that helps the judge judge you. And the judge, in some ways, is just another way to describe the inner critic. This gentleman's name is Shirzad Sharmin. If you hang around coaches, coaches are really familiar with his work. He's done work in positive intelligence, which he calls the PQ, and he helps people understand how to cope with their saboteurs, their accomplice saboteurs. Who is the strongest? So for me, this will not come as a surprise to anybody who knows very little about me. My biggest accomplice saboteur is a hyperachiever saboteur. That means that I have to achieve things all the time and that I have to be in motion all the time in order to achieve things. And because I'm doing that, I don't slow down enough to actually understand that I already have achieved a lot of things. Although I have made a pledge to my cohort and my husband that I will not enroll in any more degree programs ever. And so far, Karen, so far so good. It's been a year and I'm not enrolled in anything. So I consider that a win. But this is a really interesting, it's an interesting assessment. It's interesting for you to take. It's interesting for if you're part of a team, for your teams to take, for your family to take, to figure out how you are really sabotaging yourself by your own behavior. And he's written a book. So if you get the book, you can, or listen to the book, it's on audiobook also. You can learn how some of his suggestions about coping with your saboteurs. So finally, thank you so much for spending your time. Dr. Hernandez has a writing coaching practice. We have resources on the dissertation writing circle. We write still every other Saturday, I believe. And I have designed a program for those who are in the dissertation process called WATE, W-A-T-E. Standing for We Are the Experts. And that is named that way for a purpose. That is named that way probably in honor of Maud, who was very busy telling me that I was not expert on anything. But it is a 5-week boot camp for dissertation writers, and it's not only about the writing. In fact, it's mostly not about the writing. So if you're interested in finding out more, I am going to be holding just a complimentary introductory session. I would love to see any of you there, any of you who are here and any who are listening to the recording. If you are a dissertation writer at Eastern or elsewhere, there is a dissertation discount for the boot camp because that's the other characteristic of graduate students is that one reason that we're striving so hard is that we're paying tuition. So I get it. Blessings to all of you on your journey. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing. And if you have questions, please chime in. Thank you.
That was so insightful. I learned so much about myself. That was really kind of embarrassing, but it was like you were talking about me. John, do you have any questions?
Oh, yeah. So I would like first to thank Dr. Mary. That was amazing. I would like to ask about the dissertation group that you have mentioned. that you have with Dr. Hernandez. Like, is it like a kind of a coaching group where you coach students who are in dissertation, or like how is it?
Yes, so well, there's two things. So one is just the Facebook group, the Dissertation Writing Circle. And then, yes, I am launching a program, a 5-week boot camp program, but it's a coaching program
Yeah.
for dissertation writers.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And so please just email me, John. I can put my email in the chat and I can I'm happy to talk with you more about it.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question.
I don't see any other questions right now, but thank you so much. This was incredibly helpful. I know anyone who's going to listen to this or, or watch it later on, they will, feel like I do, whereas I feel like you were talking directly to me and, apparently as an overachiever, and I just, yeah, it takes too much time to have to do all that stuff and I could be doing other things and I have to be productive. So it's
Yes, and they're very sneaky, actually, the inner critics, because they want to be your friend, and they're working hand in hand with that survival part of the brain, kind of pushing you along, saying, point A to point B is too far. We don't have to do it right now. And so then you end up 2 weeks later and you haven't done it right now. And so that's why, figuring out those techniques to help yourself address their kind of real concerns for you, for your survival. But you have this project that you need to do. So, it works for big dissertation, it works for smaller things where people just get stuck. A lot of it is this stuckness. And then you worry about why you're stuck, which it just makes it worse. And then they talk to you more. Yeah.
my cycle. Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop recording.
Yes.